Hello, Moshang viewers. Welcome back. Last time, our good friend Miss Tom Hafer talked about how woke his alma mater MIT is. Today, he will continue his topic. Good afternoon, Mr. Hafer.
Dr. Liu, how are you?
I'm very good. It's great to see you again.
Yeah, it's been a little while since your move, but now you're all set up and ready to go again. So today, we're going to talk about the subject of equity, which is a NewSpeak word. And we'll talk all about that. But first, we'll have a musical introduction. Equity for my university, wait and see. No more mediocrity. Now you never need to study for your test, and you'll still get A's and B's just like the rest. Equity, it's what's best for you and me. Equity, it's the new equality. Now you never need to take that SAT, cause your grade depends on chromaticity. Equity for your sexuality, now what counts? Intersectionality, so it's not enough to be just LGB. You must add a QIA and also T. Equity, it's the modern LSD. Equity, who needs rationality? Cause the feminist logic is for men. It's like taking too much hallucinogen. Equity, now there's no more need to face reality. You can live a fantasy if you're looking for some pilots for your fly-by-night airline, and you're really not judgmental if they've never done much flying. If they crash, you just declare a bankruptcy. Equity. So, what is this equity that we've been singing about? Well, equity is a NewSpeak word that has been redefined by the wokists with the specific intention of confusing people. So here's what the old definition was, the actual definition, right out of the dictionary. It is justice according to natural law or right, and specifically the freedom from bias or favoritism. But the new woke definition, right off of the MIT Mechanical Engineering website, is this. The goal of equity is to ensure fair treatment. It differs from the principle of equality in that equality affords everyone the same treatment, while the principle of equity acknowledges existing inequalities and adjusts and tailors resources to afford everyone equal opportunity. We measure equity based on outcome rather than intent. If a policy, program, activity, blah, 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 contributes to inequities, then it is just and must be modified to ensure that all members of the community can thrive. Now that sounds really nice, doesn't it? But ask yourself this question. Would you prefer that your brain surgeon was the lady who got straight A's on all of her exams and all of her laboratories, or the lady who was in the Pink Unicorns Society and had her D adjusted up to an A so that it would be equitable? So in short, the new definition of equity is supposed to sound like equality, but in fact, it is the opposite. So this brings up the whole concept of NewSpeak. What is NewSpeak? Well, NewSpeak was coined by George Orwell in his 1949 novel, 1984. NewSpeak is a language that was favored by the big government, Big Brother, as he called it, and was designed to diminish the range of thought. So exactly what they're doing with equity, making you think that it is the same as equality. Now, is NewSpeak new? Well, no, actually, it's quite old. Lewis Carroll, the mathematician, in 1871, wrote the books Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, which was a similar satire. And in this example, Alice is talking to Humpty Dumpty, who is a big egg sitting on a wall. And Humpty Dumpty is using language that Alice cannot understand. And so she says, that isn't what that word means. And Humpty Dumpty says, when I use a word, he said in a rather scornful tone, it means just what I choose it to mean. No more, no less. So that's what they're doing. They are redefining words with the specific purpose of confusing the general audience. And it's working. So the bigger concept, NewThink, also from Through the Looking Glass in 1871, 150 years ago. So she's talking to the Red Queen and the White Queen in an imaginary chess game, but they've come to life. And the queens are talking complete nonsense. They're talking about things that cannot possibly happen. And Alice laughs and says, there's no use trying, she said. One can't believe impossible things. I dare say you haven't had much practice, said the queen. Why, when I was your age, I always did it for half an hour a day. Why, sometimes I've believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. So that's a saying that people use a lot nowadays. 6 impossible things before breakfast. That's what the wokists want you to believe. So what are some examples of the things that they want you to believe, these impossible things? Well, here's a couple. So first, by Ibram X. Kendi, who is actually born Ibram Henry Rogers, the only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. The only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination. So in other words, if we want to get rid of discrimination, we've got to have more discrimination. Try that before breakfast. Here's one by Sally Haslinger, who is the MIT Ford professor in the humanities department. The core idea is that a rational stance is itself a stance of oppression or domination. And accepted ideals of reason both reflect and reinforce power relations which advantage white privileged men. So in other words, if you take a rational stance, you are privileging white men. Therefore, you should take an irrational stance. I'd say she's doing a pretty good job of that. And here from the National Education Association. Since their inception a century ago, standardized tests have been instruments of racism and a biased system. Standardized tests were instituted for the specific purpose of getting around the old boy system, where rich white people would send their sons to special prep schools and then buy good grades and good recommendations so that their sons could get into Princeton and Yale just like they did, irrespective of the worth of the student. The test was the way of finding smart people who did not have those advantages. So those are just a few modern examples of NewThink. I'm sure that you can probably find some more. But what is the effect of all this equity? So here we have the freshman demographics, in other words, the breakout by different categories at MIT, my university. So what we have here is in 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, the groups are broken out as Asians, whites, other, which includes people that they don't know, and mixed race and aliens and so on, Hispanic and Black. And here in 2020 is where equity in the form of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, suddenly becomes the major admission factor at MIT. So right here in 2020. And so what happened? What was the effect of this new equity? Well, you can judge for yourself. The Asian admissions went down, the white admissions went down, the unknowns kind of remained the same. Hispanics actually went down a little bit. The only group that went up was Black. And another example, here's what happened at Thomas Jefferson Science and Technology High School, right here in Virginia, near to me. Now, these are broken out by roughly the same groups, and it was very hard for me to get prior year freshman statistics. I could only get them for this past year, but what I have is I've got the averages over 10 years. This is the low average, this is the high point, and then this is the median point. And then, very much like at MIT in 2020, they eliminated the entrance exam for getting into Thomas Jefferson, which was the fair, impartial way of determining who would fare well, who could do the coursework. And what happened as a result of this? Well, I'll let you be the judge. But looking at this, who do you think was the target? And the question that I would ask is, what can be fairer and more unbiased than a written test to see who can do the coursework at a school like Thomas Jefferson? So you might think, well, I just won't go to those schools that favor equity over equality. Do you have a choice? Not so much. Here is an article, it's hot linked. You probably can't tell that from the video, but more colleges are adding diversity to tenure standards. So now it isn't enough that you know your subject and that you're a good teacher. Now you have to talk about how you are increasing diversity in your community. Right at MIT, there's now a hiring loyalty oath. The Department of Materials Science and Engineering sought a candidate for a tenure-track faculty position. Candidates should provide a statement regarding their views on diversity, inclusion, and belonging, including past and current contributions, as well as their vision and plans for the future in these areas. But what about other people, not university instructors? You can't discriminate in hiring and firing, right? Well, turns out not. Now, Minneapolis Teachers Union just voted a new contract in which white teachers will be laid off before any educators of color. But what about medical care? Surely they can't discriminate in that. Well, turns out they can. In New York City, they are prioritizing race in distributing COVID tests. So the question I ask is, how is this different from things like the anti-communist oaths and the racial discrimination that have already been struck down in the past in the US? Here is an article about striking down the requirement for anti-communist loyalty oaths in the University of California. The state Supreme Court rules in favor of the non-signers, the people who would not sign the California loyalty oath, and orders the university to reinstate them. So how is that different from the loyalty oaths that are being required at MIT? And even more to the point, Title VI of the US Civil Rights Code of 1964, which is titled Prohibition Against Exclusion from Participation in, Denial of Benefits of, and Discrimination under federally assisted programs on ground of race, color, or national origin. Ask how that squares with prioritizing race in distributing COVID tests or in firing white teachers before educators of color. So I'm going to recite an old maxim that we use at the poker table. When you're at the poker table and you come to a new group and you're interested in seeing whether you can beat the people who have invited you to this strange new poker game, and you sit down and they deal you a hand, in the first 5 minutes, if you don't know who the Patsy at the table is, it's you. So fill in the blank. Who is the Patsy in the equity game? That's my presentation for today.
Thank you very much for the great presentation. So I have a question. Have you heard about that some students in UC Berkeley, they were not allowed to apply for a certain area of college dorm due to their white?
Honestly, Dr. Liu, I see so many articles about things like that these days that I actually lose track of individual cases. But I do not doubt that you are 100% correct.
Yeah, so in China during the Cultural Revolution, if you were from a family with a farmer or working class background, you can automatically be promoted to a good position and go to college. So that's kind of ridiculous based on your background screen. I mean, it's equity game. It's kind of like just to replace class with race. And I don't know why the same ridiculous things happen so quickly in the US. I think people should be much more reasonable in 21st century compared to past, especially those things are failed in other countries. Why they bring to the US and promote in our, especially in our education and some corporation world, corporate America. I feel very sad, and I don't understand why it comes so quick.
I don't understand it either. The only thing that I will tell you is that people like yourself, and there are many of them, are capable of seeing through the facade and realizing that the principles that this country was founded upon are the correct ones. And the principles that Dr. Martin Luther King fought for, which was equality, not this new crazy version of equity, are the correct principles. And it is the only way that we will go forward in strength.
I totally agree with you. Thank you. Nice to talk to you again.
Yeah.
See you next time.